COVID. Oh.
It'll be a bit weird.
Yeah.
But I can possibly edit it out,
That's
but
fine.
I don't think I can.
Okay, it'll be fine.
Hello.
Hi, Nigel. Lovely to see you.
And you. Yes, very nice to be with you. Should I start by introducing myself?
Probably a good idea.
So I'm Nigel Roberts. I work for the Institute for Children, Youth and Mission, which is a Christian-based educational charity, which is also part of Newman University in Birmingham. My specialisms are chaplaincy, education and theology. And today I'm going to be looking at how Charlotte Mason has influenced modern educational thought and how it's really beginning to filter through to a lot of critical thinking in today's world. It's also quite practical, hopefully, and there'll be some ideas for you to try at home.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm Sarah, for those of you who don't know me. I home educated my children for 6 years, and they've just recently gone into school in year 4 and year 6. They are enjoying it so far, so we will see how this journey pans out. But it's really great to have Nigel here, and he's going to share lots, and I'm just here for being here. So let's see what happens.
So hopefully most of you know who Charlotte Mason is. I would say she's a woman who's on a little bit of a roller coaster. Sometimes she's really in vogue and people love her. A Victorian educational theorist. Sometimes people think, oh no, she's really old-fashioned. But I think we're looking at a crest of the wave now where Charlotte Mason is very much in vogue again, and people are recognizing that she was way ahead of her time, and hopefully that will come through today. And we'll be looking particularly at her influence on other theorists, but also, and this is sort of spoiler alert really, because her Christian faith was fundamental and central to everything she did. And the use of the Bible was key to a lot of her teaching methodology. And we'll be doing some of that as well. So if you're not used to using the Bible or thinking about the Bible, maybe it's a time to start. So I'll go straight on. So one of the important principles about Charlotte Mason is she asked this important question, what do you see? So I've got 2 pictures on the screen now. So Gwyneth Paltrow and a chap at the top. So I'm going to ask Sarah, what do you see when you see those people?
Well, I see a famous person and a homeless person.
Okay. So I used to teach drama in a school, and I'd say, okay, so tell me more about what you see. What do you see?
Well, I see somebody who would be considered to be very at the bottom, very successful, and at the moment she's looking happy. Gwyneth Paltrow always seems like she's happy to me. And then the guy at the top, homeless, he'll work. Oh, it does say will work for food, which is interesting. So on there, I actually see somebody who's willing to make a go of it and wants to work, but is having a hard day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlotte Mason has an exercise where she just keeps asking people, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see? And you go deeper and deeper. And in the end, you start saying things like, I see somebody who has experienced hardship. I see somebody who has been successful or followed their dream, and tries to get right down to the soul of a person, really. And she says, we really need to think about the reality we inhabit, because that determines how we see people. So I was thinking on the way here, when I was a teacher and I was having meetings with other teachers, we used to say sometimes about a student, he is so naughty, or he is so awful about this person. And it was this describing them as what they are, as opposed to the behavior they were exhibiting. And Charlotte Mason really hated that. And she says, we can see people in that way, and that's objectifying them, making them into statistics, making them part of a machine, or we can see them in a different way. And because she's a Christian, she definitely saw them in a different way. And this is a quote of hers from one of her books. A person is a life and a reality created by God, and that determines completely everything that follows in her theories and in her philosophies, because the person she is working with is somebody created by God. And that makes a world of difference. Not a cog in a machine, not someone who's going to contribute to economic well-being and social capital, but just a person valued in their own right. Don't know if anybody watching this has studied Maria Montessori.
I know Montessori. I don't know Maria, but I know Montessori school.
So Maria Montessori was, well, not quite a contemporary, almost a contemporary of Charlotte Mason. She was Roman Catholic. Right. And she was working in India and wondering why the children who were in India on the streets seemed to be really well educated and seemed to know how to live. And she studied them and how they explored life and learned from doing and being. And I think she possibly was influenced by Charlotte Mason, but she had the same view. A child is a blank canvas on which God will paint his masterpieces is one of her famous sayings. And it's very similar to Charlotte Mason. It's how we see. So the question I'd ask of anybody watching this or anybody listening, so Sarah, it's when you see children, young people, what do you see?
Well, I suppose in some ways I see potential. I see that basically any kid put in the right situation will really thrive and grow and develop. And it's just sad when they're not put in the right situation, whether that be educationally or whether that be it's a hard family situation. And you know that if that family situation was not so hard, for whatever reason and whatever solutions, that actually that child can thrive and be the best them that they can be. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's good. And I think what you're doing there is talking about the potential of an individual and making them the center of everything. And Charlotte Mason really rebelled against, I suppose, one size fits all curriculum.
Yeah,
and it was very person-centered. So she had this idea that in teaching, you had to have a rich and a relevant curriculum that fed mind, body, and spirit. And she was very conscious that every human being was a spiritual being as well as a physical being and an intellectual being. And that was part of her educational process. So education that doesn't meet one of those three things isn't education at all, according to her. And that was in Victorian times, she was saying this, and it's only really in the 1970s in Britain, late 80s particularly, actually, that the whole idea of SMSC, you come across SMSC, which is part of the national curriculum and which Ofsted inspects on.
SMSC?
So spiritual, moral, social and cultural education.
Okay, is that what PSHE?
PSHE contributes to SMSC. So in a state school, there will be somebody with a responsibility for SMSC.
Right.
Ofsted will inspect, see how well are you doing in SMSC, and the curriculum should be created in such a way as to feed into SMSC. So what's happened in the latter part of the 20th century, and it's still certainly there today, is Charlotte Mason's vision of a holistic education has been taken on board. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize. And it's just creeping through, you know, I observe what's happening in the educational world. I'm really seeing that a lot of these ideas, people are suddenly grasping and thinking, this is an original thought, but it originated 150 years ago or whatever. So for her education, and this is where some people watching it might think, oh, this is a really strange thing to say. At the core of everything she did, she really thought the Bible was important. And she was particularly keen on the Old Testament, and we'll look at that, at the reason why in a moment. But I think it's also quite interesting, or you might not think it's interesting, but I think it's really interesting that in the last 3 months, there's been a new RE curriculum released across various regions. And as part of it, they said, in order to make RE relevant, we've really got to focus on the core text. Well, two things really, personal testimonies and core text. So what does religion look like in real life? Let's talk to some human beings. And what does it look like on the page? Let's read some core books. So for any child doing religious education from now on, they will have to have at the core of it meeting
Real
Christians,
people.
Muslims,
Yeah.
Sikhs, Hindus,
Which makes sense.
and reading the Quran, the
Yeah,
Torah,
totally.
the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
So that's Charlotte Mason.
Mhm.
And again, her influence is coming through and it's really good. This next bit might sound a little bit academic, but I think there's something really vital in it. Why did you think it was so important? She thought it was important because the Bible for her was the basis of wisdom. And she thinks education is not for economic capital, but education is for wisdom.
Mhm.
You teach a child so they live well and live right,
Yeah.
not so that they live successfully
Right.
in terms of economic
Right. Gain. But it depends what you mean by the word successful. If you are talking about financially,
yes, that's what.
whereas
Yeah.
I think my question to people is, success. Are you successful and are you happy? And then success is more, I suppose you determine what you think is successful. If you say you're successful, then you're successful.
Yeah.
If you say you're happy, you're happy.
Yeah.
Or joyful, which is another debate.
Yeah. She thought wisdom was really important, which is interesting because the Italian education system says the core of their education is to make good and wise human beings. And I think that's an echo,
nice.
which is really echo. So she said the Bible, particularly looking at the Old Testament, does three things for a child and a young person growing up in terms of education. These are very technical terms: Torah mode, prophetic mode, wisdom mode. But basically the three things that the Bible does that Charlotte Mason wanted to happen in her schooling. She wanted to disclose, disrupt, and teach discernment through these core texts. And also, to be fair, other texts that she picked up on, whether that's literature or good travelogues or whatever. So the disclosure part of it, she says basically, if we read particularly the books of the law in the Old Testament, we will discover who we are. And if we discover who we are, we will also know who other people are. And that is the person created by God, living a life of reality. So that will completely transform the way you relate to people and how you think about yourself, your value, your esteem, etc. It's disclosing to you, you are this person. It helps lay the foundations for identity in a way that today, I don't know if you come across the phrase digital Babylon.
Oh, I've heard, maybe it was you.
It might be, mate.
You telling me about a book?
Yeah. Lots of people are saying actually, digital Babylon is the country young people are exiled to and live in, which is the whole internet-based digital world. And in that, identity is found in other people's comments, and you form your identity from all these different things. But Charlotte Mason says, no, your identity can be found in these books of the law because you were created by God and you were not just good, but very good. Lots of other things that you can find out about there. You can find out how to live rightly and all the rest of it. So that's the first part, why she thinks it's important. The second part is disruption. And in the Bible, there are lots of books of prophecy. And she says, actually, if you get a child to read these, they will rethink how they look at the world, the values of the world that they have imbibed from social media or their friends or whatever, TV, will be shaken up and changed. So she's very keen on the book of Amos, which talks about justice and right living and making sure the poor are looked after. It's a radical way of looking at the world and relationships, and it's there. And it disrupts the way you think. You look at people in a different light. We will question what the world says is right and live possibly a different world, which is quite exciting. And you can see how this is beginning to be a basis for an educational philosophy. And then the third bit is, she calls it the discernment bit, which is wisdom. How do we make sense of the world around us? How do we make decisions? How do we deal with the everyday questions of ordinary life? All of that is found in the Bible, basically. So whether you think that's good or not, it was the foundation for her teaching approach. I don't know, quick response from you.
Well, no, I'm going to read Amos. That's what I'm going to do. That's my response. I'm going to read the book of Amos. But yeah, I mean, the Torah is obviously in a lot of religions use the Torah anyway, and probably believe very similar to what we believe as Christians about lots of things.
Yeah.
Just probably different about who Jesus is, but everything else very similar.
So if you're adopting her ideas, you might think, I don't want to make this quite so core, but you can see that at least she is trying to say all education should teach about identity. So through this, your children should grow up knowing how special they are, how valued they are, and that they have a worth that is beyond their imagining. They should also know how to question the reality of the world and not just accept everything.
Definitely need that.
And thirdly, they need to grow wise and to live wisely, thinking about other people and so on. And so she uses the Bible to teach those things. You may use different ways to teach those things, but she's saying, here are 3 strands I would like you to follow. Yeah. And I find that quite exciting, and wish I'd done it when I was a parent with my children. The great outdoors, this is another aspect of her teaching that I think has influenced a lot of other people. This is Scale How, which is...
Oh, is that in Ambleside?
In Ambleside.
Wow.
So as part of my role, I'm an external examiner of the University of Cumbria, which owned the Charlotte Mason Archive at Ambleside. And so I've been to this place quite a few times and walked in and around it. And it was very much influential for her educational thinking and theory. But what a lot of people don't know is that Charlotte Mason herself was in turn influenced by Baden-Powell, who founded the Scout movement.
Okay.
So
I have recently read some books, some Scouts books and some Brownie books from back in the day, from a vintage shop in Henley and Arden that sold them, which I now have. So that's quite interesting.
Well, one of the first books that she gave to her teachers was the Scout manual that Baden-Powell wrote. And it was basically for boys, written for boys. And she said, no, we'll do that. I'm going to teach my girls how to tie knots, how to make fires and all the rest of it.
Well, I met most of my home educated friends I met in the forest.
Okay.
Well, in Holderswood next to Cannon Hill Park. That's where everybody met. So hello, home ed friends who I met in the forest.
Yeah. So she thought, okay, you've got your Bible for your wisdom and all the rest of it, but actually God has also created another textbook, which is the whole of the outdoors and nature. And this is something that is really coming around today. In the 1920s and 30s, there was an American theorist called John Dewey. I don't know if you've come across John Dewey. He wrote a wonderful book called Experience and Education, where, influenced by Charlotte Mason, he started schools across America where they studied from 8 till 1, and then from 1 till 4, they spent in the afternoon.
Outside. Yes, that's it, isn't it? You're meant to be. But that was always a pressure when I was home educating. I was like, we're not outside enough. And just trying to kind of fit in everything became a pressure, which it shouldn't become a pressure.
Well,
if you have any answers for that.
No, well,
get up earlier, get up at 8.
Well, starting school at 8 was a big thing. I mean, John Dewey was slightly different because it was American, so in his afternoon he taught hunting.
Yeah, no,
so they'd go out,
we're not doing hunting.
They'd go out with their guns and things, but they also learned how to make fires, how to track, how to build bivouacs. They were taught botany and how to recognize food to forage and all of that. And it's totally Charlotte Mason. When I was at Scale How last summer, I spent some time in the library there, which is worth a visit, and you can get hold of the nature diaries of her students from her college days, and they are amazing. So you open these books and there's some art there, so they've sketched some wildflowers, and then there's some botany, and they talk about the sort of structure of the plant and all the rest of it. And then over the page there are reflections about how did it make you feel looking at this plant, what is it making you think about, where do you fit? And they are amazing textbooks.
And I'm thinking, beautiful. Like, that's why really important as home educators to come together so we can inspire each other, because I think just saying you have to do a nature journal and you don't know what to put in it, but whereas when you see someone else's nature journal, I know I've seen people's and being like, oh wow, I want to do that, and it's kind of that inspiration, which takes me back to when I was at school and everybody got an A in art just because we were inspired by each other. They didn't teach us anything, they just let us get on with it, and we were all inspired. And that's very similar to kind of, you know, seeing these books and just being inspired by them, and you can teach each other so much.
My wife and I spent 3 hours in the library just reading children's textbooks, which was just fantastic. But for me, I mean, partly because I think reflective learning is part of education, an important part. I was just bowled over by the rambling thoughts that Charlotte Mason allowed her students to have in response to what they had seen on the hills around Ambleside or whatever. Quality of the art was really high as well. I could never aspire to that.
Yes.
But
we try.
Yeah. Now, this is probably the bit I think is, for me, the most significant part of it. The idea of investing in the individual. If you're going to teach them all these things in the outdoors, through the Bible, or whatever it happens to be, that I see a person as an individual and a life and a gift. You've got to recognize the individual and their gifts. And there's a phrase in one of her books which says, I recognize the abuse of neglecting talent. Which
that is powerful.
Which I think is an amazing statement. And I think it happens all the time because we try to shove people into a mold that they do not fit. She wouldn't have said one size did not fit all, but that is exactly what she means. And she's got a really good textbook of hers called Parents and Children, where it talks about the role of the parent and the role of the child. And one of the things that a role of a parent was discovering the interest of the child so that they could invest in what they're interested in. Have you heard of Summerhill School?
Yes. Totally.
Which is sort of has echoes of this, where basically you chose your own curriculum.
Yes. Well, I went to a school that was a bit like that. As in, so I went to Trinity over in Warwick and Leamington. We had no rules. We called the teachers by their first name. We wore what we liked. And if you were in year 10, you were allowed to smoke as long as you smoked behind the bike shed. But that was until it burned down. Okay, I've never smoked in my life. Yeah, so similar. So I've been researching recently. So Summerhill School came up, and the fact that they got Ofsteded 9 times in the 1990s. So that's pretty much once a year.
Remarkable school, and there's a really good Pelican paperback about their experience, which is worth having a look at. Yeah, it wasn't without its problems, but it was quite interesting. And John Dewey, who I've already mentioned, his schools, which were started in Chicago, he built his school so that there was a shop and sort of workshops, and people made things that they then sold in the shop, and they learnt business skills through selling.
Real stuff.
They had a museum, they had a reflective space, they had an art gallery, and all the rest of it. And basically, you chose where you went,
what you were interested in
for your lessons.
Yes, that sounds ideal.
And there were a couple of exceptions where everybody had to do some maths and some language, but basically you gravitated to and could easily spend 7 hours of your day
doing what
art.
you loved.
Yeah,
which makes sense.
Which does make sense.
Because making money doing what you love surely is like life is hard, but it's not meant to be that hard. You're not meant to work at a job that you hate. That just makes no sense. Because then you're not going to do it very well.
That's right. Unfortunately, I think we live in a community where education is seen as being a tool to economic capital.
Yes.
And doing a job where you're painting all day isn't going to contribute to the economic well-being of the country in any significant way. But if you were computer programming and earning 100,000 and paying so much in tax. So it's quite hard to convince the powers that be that post 14 probably allowing this approach to work is a value. But I think there's a bit of a change coming, and you can see it in further education colleges to some extent, and in various movements around the globe.
Yes, definitely. There's definitely places where you can go and you do, the old apprenticeships that you used to be able to do. That made so much sense. It's like learn how to bricklay, learn how to do a house up. But nowadays, if it's very much kind of academics, keep kids in education as long as possible, it just kind of feels like a babysitting service. My daughter went to school when she was 8 for the first time, and it took her 6 weeks to catch up. And it just makes no sense that the kids are there learning how to read from the age of 4, struggling through maths, English for years and years and years, when you can just teach them when they're ready and they pick it up really quickly and they don't hate it. And it just, I don't want to get angry, but it makes me a bit angry, because it's just a babysitting service and a little bit more. And I know that I know a lot of teachers, and they do their best in a system which isn't great. And that's a real shame.
The Finnish education system is similar
Yes.
to what you're trying to describe there. So just going to introduce, alongside Charlotte Mason, Howard Gardner. Have you come across Howard Gardner?
I have not come across Howard Gardner.
Who I think is a genius, really, and very, very influenced by Charlotte Mason's idea that you discover the talent, interest, and you go in that. He had this phrase, it's not how smart you are that matters. What really counts is how you are smart. And he came up with this idea that we only measure intelligence by a child's ability to write or do maths. But actually there are multiple intelligences, and we need to discover what they are in our children and focus their education around those intelligences with a little bit of bleed around the edges. So I just want to take you through what Howard Gardner said those were, because it might help those of you who are watching this to think, oh yeah, that is it. So I have a daughter, Joanna, who you know, Sarah, who failed everything. She was special needs. She failed all her GCSEs. She went to an FE college and got level 1 skills for work and all the rest of it. But she was the college's student of the year. And when we asked why did she win it, they said, oh,
she's so nice.
Because she was so nice. She was a genius
at being nice.
At being nice. And it was recognizing that that's really important. And so Howard Gardner has these multiple intelligences, and I'll just go through these because this is so Charlotte Mason, really. So he talks about there is a musical or rhythmic intelligence, linguistic, verbal one, intrapersonal, existential or religious, sometimes logical maths, interpersonal, naturalistic, visual, spatial, and bodily kinesthetic. And I find it so helpful. And what he says, which is exactly what Charlotte Mason was saying 150 years before this was even suggested, is once we discover where our children's interests lie, then just focus that curriculum around that, and everything else becomes on the fringe. Nowadays, I would say art club, drama club, sports clubs are the fringe of the school. It's called extracurricular. And he would then say, actually, no, let's make those core curricula, and everything else becomes extracurricular.
Because you could pick up on a lot through those things anyway. A lot of maths, a lot of English. If you're writing a play, you're writing.
Absolutely. So I'll just very quickly go through this. So visual, spatial, basically you like pictures, you like diagrams, you like films, you like selfies, you like doodling. Well, you do. You think in images rather than words. So if you discover that your child's intelligence and way of learning is a visual way of learning, then
do that.
Make sure you've got filmmaking as part of what you're doing, whether it's on your mobile phone or your cameras or whatever. Make sure you're allowing them space to do pictures. So I work at the university, and Newman is brilliant at allowing us to say, this student is really, really clever. but they're not the world's greatest writer, and they'll get 40% if they submit an essay on this topic. But would you allow them to do a diagram?
And they'll get 100% or 80%.
Yeah. So lots of our
Yes,
students paint their assignments, which is exactly what this is.
Yes, that reminds me of my art dissertation, and I made a massive textile book, and I kind of stuck the writing onto it, or sewed the writing onto it. And I found it the other day, and I was like, "Wow, this is actually really good."
It is, yeah. And that the reason this doesn't work in a big classroom is you've got 32 children with different needs, and how can you possibly do it? But in a home situation, fine. Kinesthetic intelligence. Some people are just brilliant at sports. Touchy-feely. As you work, you experience.
It's like trying to get someone who just wants to do sport to sit down.
Yeah.
My daughter, we bought her one of those bars that you put across the door, so she would be swinging on that when I'm trying to kind of tell her what to do and think, sit down. It's just like she didn't want to sit down, she just wanted to be up and either on roller skates or swinging on a bar, which is fine.
Yeah, and it is fine. And if you can think in terms of, which Charlotte Mason used to do, is what lessons can we incorporate into this experience? And that's the key thing from Charlotte Mason. What are you experiencing? What are the things we can learn from that experience? And it's called the reflective cycle, which she's really keen on. So experience, whatever it happens to be, reflection leads to learning. So yeah, there's the kinesthetic. The intrapersonal is the really quiet person. That's me, really. You like, time alone. You like being away from others. You might be very religious. You like listening to music. You like sitting on the edge of the sea and watching and all the rest of it.
I think it's about knowing that that's okay. If that's you,
Yeah,
that's okay.
absolutely
It's fine
okay.
to be quiet.
Absolutely, it's fine to be quiet. And you might have a child who you could just say, just go away for an hour and come back.
Go away for 3.
Well, even if they go away for 3 and you come back and you say, what was it like? And they tell you what they have thought about, what they have learned, the direction of travel their thinking has gone in. And it might be all over the place, but in conversation about that experience, again, the reflection, they've learned.
Yes, definitely.
And some people are really, really good at that. If I said to my older daughter, Hannah, go away and think for a minute, she'd be back after 20 seconds saying, is my time up? Because she isn't a genius at that, but some people are genius, and we need to call that out.
But there's also, I think, the seasons as well, because I've done a lot of reflecting over the last 6 months, but I would never have chosen to sit down and do that reflecting. Whereas when you've got COVID and you're in a caravan over Christmas, you have time for that kind of thing. And I think we need time, and I think that's
part and parcel. Interpersonal, people who like working with others, you learn from others. I think most of my students would say they don't learn from my lectures, but when I break them into small groups,
they learn from each other.
They learn from each other.
So they are really learning.
So they are learning, yes.
And from you.
In a sense, because we've prompted
You're creating that space for them to learn.
And that, I mean, I'm not a home educator, never have been a home educator, but I can see that one of the dangers of it is the lack of the interaction with others unless you're incorporating that.
Yes, and I think that is a danger, but there is massive home ed communities in Birmingham here, but also, around the country and in Wales and in Scotland. But it's about actually the parents have to make that happen. If the parents are not like this and don't like being around people, then the danger is that they keep away and they keep their kids away, and their kids might not be like that. So there is a risk there, but it is about creating spaces where kids can meet up so that they don't miss out on that social side of things, but life as well.
And some people are just really good at it. I'm hopeless at it. I'm really shy. If I've got a choice between seeing lots of people or being on my own, I'll always choose to be on my own. But some people will be really, really good at that. And so we need to recognize that and then create the space for it and for the learning. And if we'd been together in a big group, I'd have split you up into twos and asked you to talk about the best thing about this week, the worst thing about this week, and what new things you have learned this week. And it could be anything. I've been learning about the history of Ladybird books this week, because that's just something I was interested in, and the influence of Charlotte Mason on Ladybird. But yeah, other things. What have you learned this week?
Well, I've learned that when I'm cycling, I need to carry less stuff because I put so much in the back of my bike. I've now got panniers, which are great, except I just need to travel lighter. That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
Very practical.
I used to do a small tutor. I used to tutor children for their GCSEs after school and at my home. And we would always start with a little, what have you learned this week? Which has got, in inverted commas, nothing to do with their core subject, but was everything to do with learning. Definitely. So that's, again, a Charlotte Mason thing. Linguistic intelligence, some people just love the written word. They like writing it, they like reading it, they think in words rather than pictures. I certainly do. They're the sort of people who would quote lines from a film, but not a scene from a film.
Right.
Your visual intelligent person would quote the scene. Remember that scene where in Harry Met Sally, blah, 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 and someone else would say,
and it's that whole thing about their truth, isn't it? Like both those things are true, but they're just remembered.
Absolutely. So one of the things that Charlotte Mason was really keen on was, you've already alluded to it, with going to school at age 8 and learning to read and catching up in 6 weeks. She just thought it was so important to introduce children to words. And even if you weren't, this wasn't your preferred way of learning, she still thought it was important. And so one of the things that Howard Gardner differs to Charlotte Mason on is he said, if your child is linguistic intelligent, focus on that. But if they're not, don't worry. Whereas he would say the opposite.
Yeah, I would read a lot to the children, and whether that's with my daughter swinging on the bar because she needs to be doing something else, and my son sitting there and just really into the story, listening intently. But that was, really good experience of just like reading to the children, lovely stories which we just could all enjoy.
She was very keen on the classics. So when I was in Ambleside, I looked at her recommended books for her classes. So things like Treasure Island. She was very keen on Robert Louis Stevenson, who I think is great. But she was also keen on the idea that every generation produced its classics. So one of the things I was going to ask if we were all together is, what do you think are the classic books for this generation that are essential for our children to be aware of and getting to know?
Well, I think that'd be a great, I haven't got a clue, a great question to ask, wherever this is posted, for people to say what those are. And if we can whittle that down to kind of like a list of like 50 books, which is probably already is a list of 50 books, then that would be fantastic. Yes, because for children growing up today, they are facing, I'm glad I'm not growing up today. It must be a nightmare trying to navigate through all social media and everything. We've kept our kids away from it pretty much, but now they're going to be, in a couple of years, teenagers. And what's that like? So it's a big one.
They are. We were talking about that. What is the best book you've ever read?
Well, I'm gonna have to say the Bible. I don't know. I suppose that's the life-changing book, isn't it? But I don't know.
I've read quite a few on here. I think possibly Peter Duck by Arthur Ransom, which is wonderful. Winter Holiday by Arthur Ransom. I have read it. Heidi, which is there. Black Hearts and Battersea is wonderful. I read A Little Princess last week.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that good?
Yeah, it is good.
I remember reading The Never-Ending Story to my son when he was 6, and he said, I want you to read this book to me. And I got the book from the library, and it was really thick, and the writing was really small. And I was like, are you sure you want me to read this? And he was like, yes. So he spent probably about 3 months every evening reading this book, and he just loved it and really, really got into it. And we then watched the film at some later date.
Film's not so good.
Never. Books are always better than films.
Anyway, it's an interesting question. And you could ask the same for the visual people. What's the best film? What are the classic films? You think every child should see? And songs. What are the best songs? Naturalistic intelligence. Some people are just brilliant outdoors. Love animals, love plants, love mountains and valleys. They discover God in nature. All of that. And one of the real key things here is this sense of being trapped in a classroom.
Oh yes, my goodness. I think I felt that. I think even remember working with you, it was so nice to just be free from kind of having to sit in the same place. Because I used to work with kids in a nursery. And although I kind of enjoyed it, I felt a bit trapped because I wasn't allowed to go where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was moving around, going to different places, being outdoors, and then I used to work for Youth for Christ with Nigel, and we were never in the same place. You know, we would go here, go there, go everywhere. And
On a bike.
it was on our bikes, yes.
Yeah.
And it was fun. And I think kind of, I just need to be outside. I think that's why COVID was so bad, because we weren't allowed out for an hour.
Allowed out. But some children will not have this as a focus, and will feel.
Oh, do we have to go out?
Oh gosh. There's a classic film, Hunt for the Wilder People. Have you heard of that? Absolutely. Hunt for the Wilder People.
I don't think I have.
It's about a city child in New Zealand who is
No, I haven't.
Forced to live in the outdoors, and that tension, that's just an amazing film. That is one of my favorites.
Films.
Yeah, definitely. Music, rhythmic. Ask the question: what are the classic songs people should be listening to? And this idea that you can actually transfer information and teach through songs.
Yeah,
Charlotte Mason was really keen on music, rhythm, to a certain extent dance. Violin here overlaps with the kinesthetic stuff, but also just asking people to reflect on what they've heard. So a little bit of an exercise here. So you've probably not seen this before, and if you're watching this, just watch this. It's a video by somebody who you probably never heard of. Oh no. The video and have a look at this. Try and listen to the songs we can hear, but the noise of everything else.
Well, the heart is a mystery. Stumble out of bed each day and struggle to be free. Stood by an ocean raging blue. Big wave cracked the sidewalk and I fell down there with you. Fell in with you. Scoured the land in the sunset glow. You think you know, my friend, you just don't know. That's why the heart is a mystery. But break it in two and you'll see things you couldn't see before. Frame you in a metaphor, not cast you off in our own image anymore. Big questions etched across the sky, the weight and reason of everything we'd like to know. Outcast. heart is a mystery. Stumble out of bed each day and struggle to be free. Stood by an ocean raging blue. I search for you.
Okay. So if I was using this to teach,
Yeah.
and you are musically intelligent or visually intelligent, what stood out, if anything, even if you don't like the music?
What I was thinking was about self-awareness and how reflecting on who we are and searching for ourselves, and how it's often talks about how it's not, you don't search for yourself and find yourself, you create yourself. So it's like, who do you want to be? And you create that. And I suppose when we're looking at Charlotte Mason and the way she does habits, you know, you create who you are in a sense, but also we are made in God's image. So in searching for God, we actually recognize who we are ourselves. Those kind of things is what was going on in my mind.
Were there any images that came through? Because there's an interesting pop video with it.
No images. I was just looking at the images, and I mean, I love the outdoors. So if I was told to actually be thinking of images, I would be seeing hills and mountains and that kind of thing. But I wasn't thinking images. I was thinking thoughts. Yeah.
So, which is possibly saying something about your intelligence there. I teach using that video so often, inspired by Charlotte Mason. And what she would say is, let's listen to a song, and rather than me tell you what the songwriter intended it to mean, you tell me what it means for you, and what can we learn from it. And because it's pop video with all the rest of it that goes with it, it appeals to the linguistic people because they can listen to the lyrics, it can, the visual people because there's some
images.
The girl who puts red dye in her hand and blows it when her hand is like that forms a heart when it comes out in the breath.
I missed that.
And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's an amazing image, that there's something happening there. Lyrically, because I'm a linguistic person, it talks about breaking a heart, and you'd be surprised at what you find. In the eyes of the broken, I think I saw your face, when he's talking about seeing God in poverty. I just think it's amazing. And if you are of musical intelligence and you're the sort of child that goes around with your headphones in all the time listening, they are learning all the time. But what is it they're learning?
What is it they're learning? And that's the important thing. And what is they being exposed to? I know there's kind of the unschooler, Charlotte Mason inspired unschoolers who kind of allow their children to learn, but put good stuff. And it's like, you've got to have the good stuff there.
That's right.
My children went to school and they were given laptops with access to YouTube. And what I could access on there was not good stuff. They now no longer have YouTube. But it is about kind of giving them good, wholesome stuff that is all okay. So any choice they make is going to be okay, because we're giving them a choice of good things rather than a choice of bad things.
It is. And but again, it's the same question with the films, the books. What are the 50 songs you would love your children to grow up knowing? So I've done this with my grandchildren, and I've made them a playlist, Granddad's playlist. And my grandson Ethan, who's 16 and is into some pretty hardcore rappy type stuff, which is very unpleasant, has discovered Eleanor Rigby, which is on my playlist as a really important song, and thinks it's wonderful. And my youngest granddaughter has discovered the Wombles, because there's a sort of environmental, ecological message subliminally and overtly in some of the songs. So what are the playlists? What is the playlist you would do for your children? And how could you use songs to teach those linguistically and not feel that this isn't a lesson, because all we're doing is talking about...
And also not be bound by, I know there's very much kind of like folk music and all that, that's very kind of Charlotte Mason-y, but kind of actually there's a lot of songs out there that are pop songs and other forms of, you know, soul, R&B that are also good and acceptable to use to learn, because we can learn through anything.
I think because Charlotte Mason has been appropriated by the American educational tradition, alongside that there is an American musical culture
yes, which is very strong.
Which is very strong,
Yeah.
and the songs are good. And
Because I remember meeting Christian Americans when I was 15, and they didn't listen to any music that wasn't Christian.
Yeah.
Whereas to do that in the UK was almost impossible, because as a kid we were listening to the top 40, and that was just normal part of culture. So to just listen to Christian music, there probably wasn't enough of it to listen to. The Worldwide Message Tribe, and what else?
Yeah, not a lot else.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan
Crazy.
of those YouTube reaction videos that you see where people are reacting to a song for the
Yes.
first time,
Mhm.
or maybe not the first time. But what's really good about it is you've got young people who are suddenly listening to. I watched one the other day, which was the Hollies, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, which
Okay,
is
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
tremendously powerful song, and they were blown away by it. And what happens in those 20-minute reaction videos is they are being taught and talking about what they've
Yes.
learned. And that's
And I think
is
that's
so
like a
amazing.
very positive thing about social media, is people are trying to portray who they are, and they're having to create this content. So they're actually having to sit back and watch something they probably wouldn't ordinarily watch or ordinarily look at, and comment on it and have a view. They've got to have a view on it. If you're in one of those reaction videos and you don't have a view, that's a problem, isn't it? I know they go over the top, but
sometimes they do, yeah. And but it's Charlotte Mason writ large, I think.
yes, definitely.
Just wrap this bit up, coming towards an end, really. I've been talking a long time. Another intelligence, numeric, logical. Some of your children will be really into puzzles, questions, problems, patterns, science, maths, IT. Definitely not me, but thank goodness there are people like this.
We need everyone, don't we? So we need people who are like this.
Yeah.
And that's great.
And then this is one Charlotte Mason would put in. It's not one of Howard Gardner's, really. It's a Charlotte Mason inspired one, which is the existential, about the there is something more to life than this. And I think one of the interestingly, Ofsted say one of the questions they will ask of children when they go to a school is there anything more? And what is the more? Discovering
what is
the
the
more.
point of this whole world?
But some people are really good at it, and the if, which I've just put in there, is a key to that. What if? What if what the Bible says is true? What if there is more to life than this? How would that affect the way I live? What if this really is the end of the world because of climate crisis? How will that change what I do?
Yes, and because we're not just trying to get to the end, because I'm like, what is the end? If the end is death, is that the journey that we're all just trying to go to as quick as possible, because we're all in a big rush?
So if you take Charlotte Mason's, let's focus on their intelligence and their interest, and people like Howard Gardner have done exactly that. And they've said, right, let's make our curriculum. The challenge I'd put to anyone watching this is twofold, really. What are the intelligence of your children? So what are your two children's intelligence majors rather than solitary thing? And what is yours? Because what you are will determine how you teach.
Yes, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's about that self-reflecting, like, who am I? And I'm not trying to put me on my children. I'm trying to discover who they are, so that they can be the best them that they can be. And I can be the best me I can be. I love being outside. One of my children is not bothered. And it's like, I'm not going to make him go outside for 3, 4, 5 hours a day, because he's going to hate it, whereas he wants to do other things. And that's okay. And it's not that one's bad and one's good. It's just different, and we all are made differently.
Which she focused on, and this way of thinking is very trendy at the moment in educational circles and being taught to teachers in their training. So it's quite useful. It's just on the screen now. If you wanted to find out who you are, there's one of those little things that you could have done, which is quite interesting. I'm primarily a linguistic person with a bit of intrapersonal in there.
And does it change over time?
I think so. And what Charlotte Mason would say, which Howard Gardner doesn't say, is that might be your primary focus. So we will do most of our, we will teach around that, individual learning plan around that. But actually these other intelligences will enhance your education. So let's see if we can't develop them a little bit in you as well.
But I think it's the challenge there for home educators is if you're very different from your children, how can you make sure that they get what they need?
Yeah.
And actually, do we need to come together more in community to do that? And what are those spaces? In
Well,
which we can do that?
yeah, all education is community education.
Yes. And I mean, it very much is, and very much in Birmingham, there's loads of stuff that goes on, and it is like that, but probably not for everyone.
Well, the other thing that it's implicit, I think, in Charlotte Mason's books is her idea of family was different to our idea of family.
Mm-hmm.
So her community already existed because you have grandparents and
Yes,
uncles
yes.
and aunts.
And
all
we
the rest of
ship
it.
our grandparents off to a home as
Yeah.
good as possible,
So
isn't it?
if you looked at your family, which I
Mhm.
know a tiny bit, you would educate in the context of the whole family, the extended family,
Mhm.
not the nuclear family.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And Charlotte Mason would be saying, come on.
And it's like, that's great for families who live close together, but very much people
Modern world.
live, it's a global village now.
Yeah.
I've got family, in pretty much every continent, and it's yeah, it is.
It's very
different.
difficult. So as I'm coming to the end, this is a wonderful Charlotte Mason thing that I really, really appreciate. Is she asks the question, who is the teacher? And she doesn't think it's the parent.
No, I tell you, the questions that my son would ask me, I'm like, I can't answer these questions. Maybe that's part why he's at school now, but they just get so intelligent. They have so much questions and they're so curious that you're like, I don't know. We're gonna just have to Google that,
Yeah, learn
or
together.
we're gonna have to get you to listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson, because I don't know what would happen in that scenario that you're saying, what if?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just too much, yeah.
So there's a guy called Paulo Freire, who I'm not sure if he was influenced by Charlotte Mason or not. He's South American liberation sort of theologian, really. But he brought in the concept of non-formal education as opposed to formal. He was trying to educate the farming class of South America who were being ignored generally. And he said the current education system that he was part of was what he called the banking system. The teacher has all the knowledge, the student is an empty vessel. They deposit all that knowledge like into a bank, into the child. The teacher is revered, they have status, and they're important because they know everything. The child has status, which is nil, because they know nothing. And Freire said that's just corrupt and wrong. And what you have to move towards is a relationship where there's the teacher learner and there's the learner teacher, and both of you. So the child is the learner teacher, and the teacher is the teacher learner, and no one person knows it all, and there is the mutuality.
Because I think I very much saw it as like, oh, I'm facilitating their learning because I don't know it all at all. But I can kind of find some stuff out, or help you to find some stuff out, or take you somewhere where they do know, or get you to meet someone who actually knows about that rather than me.
There's a new educational process that has been pushed, particularly through RE, which says for the future in teaching, make inquiry at the heart. And so when I'm teaching teachers, I say, if you're talking at the front of your class for more than 10 minutes, you fail as a teacher. At the heart of your lesson, the students have got to discover for themselves. You facilitate, the word you've used, really important, by making available to them the resources, the books, or whatever. But
it's just set the classroom up and let them get on with it.
I'm just reading a book by Elizabeth Goudge. Have you heard of Elizabeth Goudge? She's a novelist from the 30s who was a Christian and was hugely influenced by Charlotte Mason in her approach to teaching her own children. And it's called City of Bells. And there's a chapter 3, I think it is, which is just about how in this city, one school was set up and what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's a Charlotte Mason school writ large, and it's described as part of the novel. And this room has got a geography section, maths section, or whatever. And the children come in, and the teacher says, "What do you want to do today?" And one boy says, "I'm going to go over there." And then they come back and they teach each other what they've
been
learned in
learning.
geography.
Yes, and they inspire each other, and that's what we should do. You get inspired by the people, you get excited by other people and what they're doing, and then you're like, "Oh, I want to do that, but I want to do it like this," and you kind of change how you're doing something.
Yeah.
I mean, that was my whole art experience at school. We just were there inspiring each other, and everybody came up with some amazing stuff.
So that's that key question from Charlotte Mason. This is just a picture. We would have done this in a big group. You'd never tell, according to Charlotte Mason, a child what the picture is about.
No.
Great work of art. So this is a painting, a sketch by Dame Laura Knight. I don't know if you know Laura Knight.
No.
Great artist, British artist, the first woman to be part of the Royal Academy and all the rest of it. And that's a picture that she drew. And I know what she thinks it's about because she's written about it in her autobiography, which I've read. But I would never presume to teach a child that this picture means X, but I would allow a child to teach me what it means for them.
Yes. Because
So
you don't know the backstory. I don't know the backstory.
No. So just looking at this, it's a fairly basic one. I nearly showed one. She does a lot of pictures of the circus and things. But what can you see in that picture?
Well, I see a ballerina who is very, very good, and not everybody, people are looking at her. The ballerina at the front, this lady here, maybe she's looking at it and thinking, wow, maybe she's jealous, maybe. And there's obviously some others that are putting on their shoes, getting ready to perform. And then you've got people who are maybe in the crowd meant to watch. Then you've got this guy over here. I don't know what he's doing. He's not interested at all.
Operating the curtains.
He's operating the curtains.
Yeah.
So is this person bending down, putting on their shoes, or are they on stage?
They're not on stage yet. No.
Whereas this lady is on stage performing. So this lady at the front is probably getting ready to perform. And then you've got some people who are watching, but I can't work out the perspective of where people are, where the stage is, etc.
But if I was using this one, I just talk about what it teaches about human relationships. What does it say about?
We're all doing different things at different times, and that's okay.
Yeah. And how we feel about other people's success and jobs. Loads. So the teacher, so you've just been teaching me a little bit about Laura Knight, and you'd be teaching Laura Knight a bit about herself and her own painting.
Whoever Laura Knight is.
Oh, she is just wonderful. This is what I think we'll finish with this. It's a famous quote from Matthew Arnold. Education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And it's a phrase that Charlotte Mason appropriated for herself, and it is probably her most quoted quote in all of her books that I'm aware of. But there are three things in here that I think are really important for adopting Charlotte Mason in whatever circumstances you're doing it. If education is an atmosphere, then that atmosphere is created through relationship. So the relationship of the children to each other, the relationship of the children to the family, to the parent, to the teacher, whatever it happens to be, teachers to each other, and so on. And cultivating that atmosphere is key. Maria Montessori, who we've mentioned, thought atmosphere was so important. Her schools looked different to anybody else's school because she thought the atmosphere was important. She was also the first person I know to put an arboretum in every school building because she wanted a space for children to go to when they were feeling tense, where the atmosphere was different. And so that's important. So what is the atmosphere you're creating in your home or whatever? It's a discipline, which is a word that we don't like, but she actually says truth isn't relative, it's objective. Sometimes some facts do exist and some things are true. This is particularly the Christian aspect of her coming through here. we can't say to a child, what is your truth? What is true for you in certain circumstances?
Yes, it's like there is truths that are for me and truths that are for you, but then ultimately there's some things that are just true, surely.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
I see things differently to the next person, but some things, like that shop is red over the road, and it's white, and it's probably other things as well, but it is red. That is true.
Yeah.
And I think going back to my point about potential, in some ways I don't like that word because it kind of says that you're not important who you are now.
Yes.
Whereas I see kids having a lot of potential, but I also see kids having a lot of themselves now and a lot of value now.
Yeah. And
the child is a person. The child is a full person, not half a person, but a full person. As soon as they are, I don't know, conceived, whatever they are, a full person.
Yeah. The final bit of life, which is really what we've been talking about mostly today, their education needs to be subjective, i.e. child focused, focusing on their areas of intelligence, areas of interest, investing in them and what they are interested in. And if you adopt these three things, these three strands of your approach to education,
then you have it sorted.
You have it sorted, and you're doing the Charlotte Mason way in its very vaguest. I mean, she does. If you go to the place in Ambleside, you can see some of her lesson outlines and her lesson plans and all the rest of it, which is really interesting. And you realise actually sometimes it did look a little bit more conventional, but her principles were always being driven. And this is the most important one of them all.
And that's it, isn't it? It's about majoring on the things that are most important and then everything else just kind of happening.
Yeah.
And it's hard, it's not easy, and it's not like you need the support and you need the time to reflect. And when you're in a family context, you know, you've always got something to do. You're always busy. You don't have time to sit down and reflect a lot of the time. And I think that's what we need to focus on, having those times to be able to reflect on what's happened on the previous term or whatever, rather than just kind of like racing through, doing this, doing that, ticking things off a list. But actually that these are the key things to get right. That relationship is important. Yeah. And the discipline and the life. Yeah.
So
perfect. Thank you.
Yes, we'll stop there. And yeah, get back to me if you need any further.
And we'll put some links in of some things as well, to make it easy for people to be able to follow on those books that we've talked about and the pictures and
talking of books, if I was to recommend any of her books, probably the most relevant to your audience would be Parents and Children.
Parents and Children. How thick is Parents and Children?
About 140 pages.
Okay, so not that much. I mean, Charlotte Mason has written, what, 6 volumes? Oh, right. I've not read, well, there's the 6 volumes that people talk about in the home education circles.
Okay.
I've not read those 6 volumes. I've had one and I've looked through it, but I've never actually sat down and read it. And I was home educating for 6 years. So we just need something that's 140 pages. Let's read that.
Parents and Children is focusing on who you need to be, rather than on her methodologies. So in terms of creating that atmosphere, it's really quite interesting, but it's also quite encouraging because it says all the things you can be. The potential of the parent is explored in that.
Well, that's it, because as a parent, you've still got a life, and it's about still having a life, even though your life is kind of consumed in family and consumed in home educating your children. You're still you, and it's about not losing you in the midst of home education and having to be kind of everything at home. You can't lose who you are. You can still do things and be you. So thank you, Nigel, so much. And we'll sign out now, but yeah, you'll hear more.